If you don't have notes for one of these sections, if you're absent, then they are online. You know where they're at. I've told you that before. Okay. So, factoring versus quadratic formula. Now you're going to have to decide. We are still solving quadratics. And why are all of these equations, if you look at all the equations on this page, why are they quadratic equations? Because you see an x squared. If the highest exponent is x squared, that is a quadratic equation. So solving a quadratic equation is a lot more complicated than solving a linear equation like we did on the warm-ups. Actually, we did it some today too. You can't just use opposite operations and get x by itself. You either have to do graphing and see where they cross the x-axis, which isn't super accurate. You either have to solve it by factoring, solve it by the quadratic formula, and we're going to learn the third way tomorrow, which I think will be the easiest way, but it won't always work. So what we're going to look at is to solve a quadratic equation, you're going to have to either do factoring or quadratic formula today. So it's more efficient to use factoring. So if you can factor, I want you to factor because it's going to not take you as much time, plus there will not be as much room for error. So if you can factor, I want you to factor. If not, the quadratic formula will always work. So on the test, which you're going to have Wednesday after break, if it says use any method, or if it lets you choose what method you want to do, and you do the quadratic formula, then I will still count it. But for today, I want you to try to go through and figure out which ones you can factor. So choose the most appropriate method and then solve them. So let's look at number 2 real quick. So as I look at number 2, let's think about factoring and quadratic formula. For both of those methods, factoring and quadratic formula, I have to get my equation equal to what? 0. So no matter if you're factoring or doing the quadratic formula, I need to get it equal to 0. I need to get everything on one side. So if I look at number 2, what would I do to get it equal to 0? Subtract 18x. I tend to just move things to the left. It doesn't really matter. You could have subtracted 4x squared, but I tend just to move things to the left. It's just kind of what my habit is. So I get it equal to 0. No matter what, always get it equal to 0 for factoring a quadratic formula. So that's at least the way you can start all of them. Now you want to look at it. We're looking at the left side, 4x squared minus 18x. We kind of ignore the equal 0 part. And you want to ask yourself first, try to factor it first if you can. Can I factor 4x squared minus 18x? Yes. What's the first thing I check for when I try to factor it? Greatest common factor. Look at your reference sheet. Is there a GCF for 4x squared minus 18x? 2x. So I take a 2x out front. Like I said, this is mostly review, but it's good stuff to know because you're going to have to know it in every single math class you take. Plus, it's just good to kind of review factoring and kind of telling the difference on how to use which one. So if there's a GCF, factor it out. I take out a 2x. So if I take out a 2x, Kinsley, what's going to be left? Yep, 2x minus 9. Good. Think about reverse distributing. 2x times what gives me 4x squared? 2x. 2x times what gives me negative 18x? Negative 9. Now, is this solved? No, because I don't have x equals something. So how do I solve this once I have it factored? Set them equal to 0. 2x equals 0. 2x minus 9 equals 0. So once you have it factored, say each factor equal to 0. So I have 2x equals 0 and I have 2x minus 9 equals 0. Now, I have two equations that I know how to solve. How do I solve the first equation, Brittany? (2x equals 0). How do I solve that equation? Divide by what? 2. So x equals 0. Now be careful, because there's an x with the 2, you have to put 2x equals 0. If that would have just been a 2, you wouldn't have to do that step. But since there's an x with it, you have to set it equal to 0. So one answer is x equals 0. The next equation, I don't know. Let's see. Josie, how would I solve the next equation? Yep, add 9. So 2x equals 9. divide by 2, so x equals 9/2 or 4.5. I don't really care if you get a decimal, you can, or just leave it a reduced fraction. So those are my two answers, 0 and either 9/2 or 4.5. So this kind of review, this should kind of look familiar to you, but I want you to be able to choose between factoring or quadratic formula. That's what we're looking at today. Okay, questions? So this is factoring. So if you want to put it out there, that one we could factor, so we're going to factor it. Okay, any questions on that? So if you're still struggling with this stuff, I want to kind of spend another day it's kind of reviewing. So I'm trying to review as much as possible. So if you're struggling, you have lots of opportunity to kind of get this stuff. So if I look at number 3, first thing, either way, whether I factor or do quadratic formula, I always have to get it equal to what? 0. So how am I going to get this equal to 0? Subtract 5x. So I'm going to put that in the middle over on the left because there's no other just x to combine it with. So I'm not going to be able to just combine it with anything. So I'm just going to kind of put it in the middle there. So if I put it in the middle, what form do I always want to get the left side in? Standard. So x squared minus 5x plus 2 equals 0. Now I want to look at this and I want to say, do I want to factor? Always check to see if you can factor first because it will take you not as long. So as I look to factor this, is there a GCF? No. And how would I factor this left side? Ignore the equal 0. Tell me how I would start to factor this.
1 times 2.
Nope. 2. It's the shortcut. You can use the shortcut way because there's a 1 in front of x squared. And what can go in the front of those parentheses? X and x. It's a trinomial. There's a 1 in front of x squared, so I can try to factor it using the shortcut. So how do I figure out what numbers go in there? Are there two numbers that multiply to give me 2 and add to give me negative 5? So what are some things that multiply to give me 2? 2 and 1. Will that ever give me negative 5? No. So what else? Is there anything else that multiplies to give me 2 besides 2 and 1? No. And they both would have to be negative technically. But even if they were negative 2 and negative 1, would that add to give me negative 5? No. So you can't factor it. So go through, try to factor it, and if you can't find two numbers that multiply to give you the last and add to give you the middle, then it might not be factorable. Not all of these are going to be factorable. If it's not factorable, we have to use which one? Do what? Yeah, quadratic formula. So I always try to factor first. If it's not factorable, we're going to have to go and use a quadratic formula, which you guys know how to do. If you turn homework in, it looked pretty good. If you didn't turn homework in, then I don't know if you know how to do it or not. But it looked pretty good from what I got. So try to factor. If it doesn't factor, try to use the quadratic formula. Actually, quadratic formula will always work. So my a value is what, Maya? What's my a value in this formula? What number is in front of x squared? 1. Positive 1. My b value is what, Dylan?
Positive 2.
B value. So b is in front of x. And my c value is what, Lane?
0.
Nope, we ignore the equal 0. The c value is the constant, so it's the 2. So go through, find a, b, and c since we're doing the quadratic formula. And then let's go ahead, I'll write this formula up here. We'll write it up here in number 1. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So if you don't have a calculator, go grab one because it will be your friend for quadratic formula. So you have to decide between factoring or quadratic formula. So make sure everyone has one. Okay, so as I start plugging it in, I'm going to have a negative b. What's my b value? What's my b value? Negative 5. So it's a negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times, what's my a value? 1. What's my c value? 2. All over 2 times a, or 2 times 1. So plug it in like this, just like we did practice yesterday. So the only thing we're doing different today is you have to choose between factoring and quadratic formula. Now start in the top left. Negative 5 is what? What's a negative times a negative 5? Positive 5 plus or minus the square root. Show your work like this so I can see where you went wrong. Negative 5 squared. What's negative 5 squared? Positive 25. Now this is where I see a lot of mistake. It's not necessarily a minus. Put the negative with the 4. Negative 4 times 1 times 2. So what's a negative 4 times 1 times 2? Negative 8. So it's a negative 8. So don't necessarily just put the minus there and use it as subtraction. That negative goes with the 4. Multiply through. So if you get a positive, it's a positive 8. All over, what? 2. Go through, simplify your square root part. So what's 25 minus 8? 17. All over 2. And then what did I have you do? Once you got it simplified like this, I had you do what? Do what? Plus or minus. Yep. 5 plus the square root of 17 over 2. And 5 minus the square root of 17 over 2. Because the plus or minus gives you your two answers. Now, as you plug this in your calculator, be careful. And I explained this when we did it in the notes Thursday. You have to put parentheses around your entire top part when you plug it in your calculator. So as you plug this in your calculator, if you're still struggling plugging it in your calculator, look up here. Parenthesis 5 plus the square root, so second x squared, 17, parenthesis. So you have to put a parenthesis around the square root part and then another parenthesis to kind of close off the top part. Divided by 2. Which is 4.56, round to 2 places. 4.56 is what you should get for the first one. 5 plus, so 4.56. Now, and I showed you the shortcut. What was the shortcut so you don't have to type it all in? Yeah, use the arrow button. Scroll back, get over till it's blinking over the plus, make it a minus. Don't use the negative symbol left of the enter sign. Use the minus symbol underneath the plus sign, or the negative or multiply sign, and then press enter, and that's your other answer. 0.44, round to 2 places, 0.44. So 4.56 and 0.44 are your two answers. So if you were struggling with quadratic formula, this is good. The nice thing about the year-long class is that we can take time and we can kind of go through it more than once. This isn't going to happen. If you're on the verge of failing, you're going to have to take Algebra 1 again, and it's going to go a lot faster than this. So I would try your best to pass this year because you're not going to get it going any slower than this. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, let's look at 5. If I look at 5 real quick. So that one was, if you want to put a Q next to it, quadratic formula. We tried to factor it, but we couldn't find the two numbers that worked, so we had to use a quadratic formula. Okay, let's look at 5. Okay, if I look at 5, I need to get it equal to 0. So any thoughts on what I could do to get it equal to 0?
So Subtract x squared, 64.
Okay, or we could subtract, let's subtract 10x squared. That's what I would probably do first. Because I see there's only one thing over there, so I would subtract 10x squared. Either way, you'll get the right answer, but this is what I would do first. So I get 0 equals, I can combine the x squared, so that's going to give me what?
Negative 9x.
Plus 64. Okay, so I have that. Always get it equal to 0. Factoring and quadratic formula, either one, you have to get equal to 0. Try to factor it first. So as I look at this, is there a GCF
Yeah.
between 9 and 64?
Yeah.
What is it?
9.
9 doesn't go into 64. It goes into 63. Yeah, you're on the right track. So as I look at this, there's no GCF, but she noticed they're both perfect squares. So as I look at this, look at your reference sheet. It's a binomial. So as you look at your reference sheet, what's the only way I know how to factor a binomial if there isn't a GCF? So look at your reference sheet. If you don't know how to factor, please get your reference sheet out because that is going to help you. You'll be able to use it for the test. What is the only way I know how to factor a binomial after I've decided there's no GCF? I'm looking for the word. It's on your reference sheet.
Write those terms as something.
No, but what's the actual title of it? It's on the bottom of the box.
Difference of 2 squares.
Difference of 2 squares. So the only way I know how to factor a perfect square, or a binomial, sorry, is a difference of perfect squares. First of all, is this a difference? No. Can I make this a difference though?
Yeah.
What can I do? What can I factor out to make this a difference? It's currently a plus 64. I want to make it a minus 64. What can I factor out that would switch the signs?
The 9 positive make the 64
And
negative.
that's what I want to do, but what do I factor out to be able to switch those signs? So what can I factor out to make the 9 a positive and the 64 a negative? We've done it before. Some of you guys have kind of stopped paying attention, so I don't know what the plan is. What is the way to switch the sign? What do I factor out to make the 9 a positive and the 64 a negative? Yes. We multiply by -1, which is kind of the same as bringing in -1 out. So I'm going to factor out a -1. Now, if you would have moved everything to the left side, you wouldn't have to worry about this, but we will get the same answer. Because I want a difference, so I can do the perfect square thing. The difference of perfect squares. So negative times what gives me a negative 9x? 9. Positive 9x squared. So a negative times a positive gives me a negative 9x squared. Negative times what gives me a positive 64? Negative 64. Good. So I took out the -1. Now I have a difference in my parenthesis, a difference of perfect squares. So as I look at this, if you want to do the work to the side, if you still need to write this, what squared gives me 9x squared? 3x. What squared gives me 64? 8. So that's just kind of the work for factoring a difference of perfect squares. And what will my final factored form look like?
3x minus 8.
Okay?
3x plus 8.
So when you factor a difference of perfect squares, you take the things that are being squared and add them and subtract them. I still have the negative out front, equal to 0. Now, what do I do? Is this solved yet? No, I don't have x equals numbers yet. Now, when I set it up, what factors do I have to set equal to 0? Do I have to set the -1? Because there's really a -1 there. Do I have to set the -1 equal to 0? No, because it's just a constant like we've talked about before. So we do 0 equal to 3x minus 8. 0 equals 3x plus 8. So set each factor equal to 0. We don't have to worry about the -1 because it is just a constant. If there was an x with it, then you would have had to, but it's just a number. Let's solve each one. You should be able to solve each one of those. So add 8, 8 equals 3x. Divide by 3, so x equals what? 8/3. And then the next one, subtract 8, so -8 equals 3x, divide by 3, so x equals -8/3. So that one we solved by factoring. So if you want to put an F in the box so you know this when we factor. So you always want to try to do factoring. Quadratic formula will always work. Factoring tends to be a little easier, especially with some of them. Okay, questions on that? Okay, let's look at the next one. Let's look at 11. I have a couple more I want to look at. Let's look at 11. Okay, if I look at 11, I want to get it equal to 0. So what would be the easiest thing to get it equal to 0? Subtract 12 from both sides. Minus 12. So I have 5x squared minus 17x minus 12 equals 0. So always get it equal to 0. No matter what, that's the way you're always going to start these. So as I look at this, I want to try to factor this, or do quadratic, but let's always try to factor first. Is there GCF? 5, 17, and 12. GCF? No. So I move on. There are it's a trinomial. I ignore the equal 0. It's a trinomial. So how am I going to start trying to factor this? Yep, it's the 4-step way because there's a 5 in front of the x squared. What is 5 times -12? -60. So 5 times -12, -60. So that's the first step. 5 times -12. Step 2, let's see. Are there two numbers that multiply to give me -60 and add to give me what? So this is how you're going to tell whether you can factor. If you can find two numbers, then you can factor it. If you cannot find two numbers, like the one we did earlier, then you have to do quadratic formula. So are there two numbers that multiply to give me -60 and add to give me -17? So let's think. Start listing what are some things that multiply to give me -60. 20 and -3. Does that add to give me -17? 20 and -3. Does that add to give me a -17? Does 20 plus -3 add to give me -17? No. What else multiplies to give me -60? 10 and 6. What are my signs going to have to be? So will -10 and a +6 ever add to give me -17? No. So keep thinking. What are some other things that multiply to give me -60? -20 and 3. They multiply to give me -60. Do they add to give me a -17? Yes. So those are my two numbers. So if you have struggled with factoring, then you are going to struggle with this. You've had multiple weeks and multiple months to be able to come in and ask on factoring and figure it out. So if you have not chosen to do that, then you are going to struggle with this. So let's see what I have. Once I find the two numbers, what do I do with them? Look at your reference sheet. Plug them into the middle number. So 5x squared minus 20x plus 3x minus 12 equals 0. Okay, what do I do next to factor this? If I have four terms.
Separate two of them.
Yep, factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at my first two. What is the GCF of 5x squared minus 20x? So 5x. Let's see what's left. 5x times what gives me 5x squared? X. 5x times what gives me negative 20x? Okay. Now I look at the GCF of the next two. What's the GCF of 3x squared minus 12? Plus 3. 3 times what gives me 3x? 3 times what gives me negative 12? Negative 4. When you factor by grouping, your parentheses should always be the same. What's my final factored form?
5x plus 3, and then x minus 4.
Okay. What's in parentheses goes in one. What's outside, the 5x plus 3 goes in the other one. Is this solved? Nope. Take each factor and set it equal to 0. 5x plus 3 equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0. Minus 3, this is what we did last week. We had a homework assignment over it last week. So if you still don't have that turned in, this is going to be hard for you. Subtract 3, so 5x equals negative 3. Divide by 5, x equals negative 3/5. You can kind of round into 13. And then add 4, so plus 4, so x equals 4. So my two numbers are x equals negative 3/5 and x equals 4. Okay. Questions on that? I want to do one more with you. Any questions? Okay, let's look at 15. If I look at 15, I want to get it set equal to 0 first. So as I look at that, first thing on 15, to get it equal to 0, subtract 9x. There's nothing to combine it with, so I'm just going to put it in the middle, minus 9x. So I have standard form, 2x squared minus 9x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, let's try to factor. Is there a GCF of 2, negative 9, and 2? No. So I need to try to go through. It's a trinomial because you ignore the equal 0. And I'm going to have to do it the long way because there's a 2 in front, just like we did on the last one. So the first step, what do I do first? 2 times 2. So that's going to be 4. The second step, two numbers that multiply to give me a positive 4 and add to give me what? So what are some things, if they have to multiply to give me a positive and add to give me a negative, what are my signs going to be? Both negative. So what are some numbers, what are two negative numbers that multiply to give me a positive 4? Negative 2 and 2. Will that add to give me 9? No. What else? What other two negative numbers multiply to give me a positive 4? Negative 4 and negative 1. Will that add to give me negative 9? No. Anything else that multiplies to give you positive 4? No. So since there's not any two numbers that multiply to give me 4 and add to give me negative 9, you cannot factor it. So you can just cross that out. So if you can't find two numbers that multiply to give me what you need and add to give me what you need, you cannot factor, or unless there's a GCF, you cannot factor. So we're going to have to go to quadratic formula. So if I look at this one, let's find A, B, and C. A value is what? B value and C value, 2. So as I go through this, let's start with my quadratic formula. You will not have to have it memorized. X equals negative B. What's my B value? So negative 9. Plus or minus the square root of what squared? Squared. Minus 4 times A, which is, times C, which is 2. All over 2 times 2. Let's go through the top left. Someone grab that real quick. We're almost done. Okay, as I start from the top left, let's simplify this. What's a negative times a negative 4? Or sorry, negative times a negative 9. 9, positive 9, plus or minus the square root, negative 9 squared, positive 81. Now when you go through, do not put a minus sign. That negative goes with the 4. So what's a negative 4 times 2 times a 2? Negative 16. So this is a minus 16 all over 4. This is all review. You just have to choose which one would be the most efficient, factoring or quadratic formula. So let's simplify the square root part. 9 plus or minus 81 minus 16. 65 all over 4. Is 65 a perfect square?
No.
Nope. And let's see what I get. Let's write my 2. X equals 9 plus the square root of 65 divided by 4. And x equals 9 minus the square root of 65 all over 4. Okay, plug that in your calculator. Make sure you put parentheses around the top part. Try it on your own real quick. Plug that in your calculator. You should know how to do this by now.
I don't think it happened.
For some of you, you're going to be like, we've done this forever, this is boring, and that's fine. I'd much rather it would be boring for some of you than some of you guys still not understand it. You're good. Okay, what did we get? 9 plus the square root of 65, we got what?
4.25.
4.2...
7.
I got 4.27. Check that. Next one, 9 minus square root of 65 over 4? 0.23. So the only thing we're adding today is deciding between factoring or quadratic formula. And I kind of explained how to kind of decide on that one. You have to check to see if there's two numbers that multiply and add. You can factor. Okay, here's the homework. Homework 7. Okay, 16 questions. Okay, so as you look at this, you're going to string or the quadratic formula
to solve the following. Now, I am not going to count off if you choose the wrong way. However, I will tell you this. On the test and on the study guide, there will be sections that say only use factoring. So you need to know how to factor. So just FYI, I would try to factor first, and then do quadratic if factoring doesn't work. You need to know how to factor. Some of you guys I know are like, quadratic is so much easier, I'm just going to use that every time. If it gives you an option, that is fine. However, there will be some on the test and study guide where you have to factor. So I would try to factor these first, and then go to quadratic if you need to. So it says, use factoring or the quadratic formula to solve the following. So either way you choose to do it will work. Quadratic will always work, factoring will not. But I would try factoring first because for some of these it will be a lot easier. There are 16 questions. This will be due Thursday. So 2 days still, so this is due Thursday. The ones I want you to do today are 1 and 8. So I want you to do 1 and 8 today. I will check off, so once you work on those, I will let you listen to music, that's fine. You have about 25 minutes.
One of those.
Yep. 1 and 8. So do 1 and 8 first. You can listen to music. Once you have those two done, let me know and I will check off.
I have a worksheet that all I have to do is type in, like I have everything written out besides the answer. All I have to do is type it in my calculator. Can I finish that real quick and then get this?
Do these two first and then you can finish it. Do 1 and 8 first and have me sign off and then you can finish it.
She didn't end up sitting down because she was so weird.